So you talking about Bill Gates, but it makes me think of the reverse. Like I read Stephen King's autobiography where he talked about like he takes like 0 days off every year.
Whew.
And he says it's not because I want to work every day. He just goes, I can't help it. He goes, I
Oh,
have to. He goes, if I don't work, it freaks me out. He goes, I do 2,000 words on Christmas Day
oh,
in the
dude.
morning.
Okay, hold on. Before I go to the next part, you gotta do the intro because I gotta say something, but I feel like we need to put it in the episode. So
Ready?
let's go ahead and roll the podcast, and then we'll jump right back into where we were.
All right. This is the Dad Speak podcast. Podcast made by dads, but not exclusively for dads. I'm Jaxon Roberts, Stephen Freeborn.
I'm
How are we
here,
doing,
man.
sir?
I'm here. I'm in, and let's do a quick. I got my iPad over here. Let me do a quick status update on our. We'll do a quick the Dad Speak podcast by the numbers. Like they, how like they say that. Hold on, I gotta log out here. This is all right. Sign in with the emails.
The people who are watching this on YouTube, all 40 people, I'm greatly exaggerating how many subscribers we have.
No,
This V is far too revealing. I apologize to the people watching video on this. Like, I feel very promiscuous right now.
Okay, so right now, the audio version of our podcast can be found at the following places. You can find it on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Breaker, Pocket Casts, and Radio Public, as well as Anchor. The Apple Podcast thing, I'm still digging into. I've sent like 10 support emails to Anchor, being like, "What the fuck? Why is my podcast not?" So if I don't get a response here back soon, I'm just gonna do the submission and approval process myself. And let's see, our audio version of our podcast, because we kind of make jokes like if people's listening. So right now we have had. Let's see if I can get this to display correctly. Let's see. We had 15 plays on our first episode, 12 plays on our second episode, 12 plays on our, what would be that, third episode, 11 plays on our second episode. So yeah, I mean, we've got people listening. How weird is this though? The geographic regions, 68% of our plays are coming from the United States. 28% are coming from Ireland. Random.
What?
2% from the Philippines. Really just kind of different. Majority.
For those who don't know, we're in Missouri right now.
Yeah. The demographics spot on though. All listeners, at least the data that's being made available to anchors, people between the ages of 28 and 34. So we're kind of hitting our sweet spot. And funny enough, this says 60% are female and 40% are not specified, which I'm going to guess is probably going the other way towards the male category.
Yeah.
But yeah, we got a pretty good set of people. I mean, it's not like Joe Rogan level, okay, but we're just two dudes on here spitting about dad stuff. So and let's talk about YouTube. And then you can also find us on the YouTubes.
I did see on YouTube we had like 90 views, which doesn't sound like a lot because I mean in reality it's not. But I was like overjoyed to see that.
Yes, we have. Let's see.
And that's almost 100 times.
Let's see. Where did I see this? Watch time. We've had in the last 28 days we have 44 views. Average view duration is about 5 minutes, so people aren't watching the whole thing, but they're consuming a little bit.
That's all right.
And then our top video in terms of total watch minutes is the one we did on origin stories, which I think most people that they're kind of like, a lot of people are mostly curious about like the backstory and the history.
Everybody loves origin story movies.
Yeah, you gotta love that. Okay, so we've done the intro. We're back. Okay, we're here now. Okay, so what we were talking about, and I'll include some of that pre-show stuff.
Uh-huh.
But what we were talking about there was Stephen Hawking, and like I was saying, Bill Gates takes a think week where he just basically clears his calendar so he can get away and just basically. I mean, there's so much knowledge being generated by the human race in today's world. It's just like to keep up with it and process it and think about it is almost impossible, right? You got the most scientists in the history of the world ever working at one time producing things. But to your point, you were saying like
we've had so much information at our fingertips.
Yeah, it's just like I really like that idea of like setting aside that time, that kind of holiday time, or at least having the freedom to have that time where you can do with it what you want. But to your point about the Stephen Hawking thing, where it's kind of illustrative of that.
King.
What?
Stephen King.
Oh, Stephen King. You were both very smart guys, just different realms of. So what I was going to say is that's really illustrative of that point of like, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life type of thing. Yeah. And that to me is like, it's this very interesting thing. So as like a dad, or as just an individual, like I love that idea. And for a little bit of time, like for a small window of time, I kind of experienced that, and it was awesome because basically, I scribed at the hospital right after college. I was kind of in this like 1.5 year period where I moonlighted as a medical scribe in the ER, like between 30 and 40 hours a week, like 3 12-hour shifts, 3 10-hour shifts a week, something like that. And that was kind of like the bootstrap money for the gym. So that kind of like, that way I didn't have to take any money out of the gym to pay myself. That was like the money I would use for my own personal expenses, and anything we made off the gym just went right back in. But like, I was like, then like, I felt like my main priority was running this gym and trying to promote it and take care of clients and things like that. And like, I was just a straight up, like, it's funny because the term I would use is workaholic, but that carries a really negative connotation because I didn't view it as workaholism. Like, it was just, I loved what I was doing. I loved the clients. I loved the subject matter. Like, it was just, it was like, it was right in my wheelhouse. I didn't ever need a vacation from that. Right.
Yeah.
And what's interesting though, now, I came out of that period and I went to work, and I worked at a place where the team was great. The company treated us super well and did right by, me and my family and stuff. But like, the job didn't really like light me on fire that much. So it was really, really easy for me to like compartmentalize life. Like 8 to 5 is work, 9 to 5 is work. Once I'm done at work, I kind of like, it just goes away. I don't even have to try. It just falls off my radar. And now I've moved over to this new job, and I actually really, really like my new job. And now it's become this struggle where it's like that feeling of workaholism that I felt when I had the gym has kind of returned, right? But now it's like I'm in this completely different stage of life where I can't do that, right? Like, I can't like completely be consumed at all times by this thing because I've got these little kids and this wife that need me to engage with them.
Yeah.
So it's like this really interesting this passion sword cuts both ways, and it can actually be somewhat, it's actually much easier if your job is really not that. To me, it's like, it was actually easier when my job wasn't that interesting to me to find the balance. And now that my job is once again very interesting to me, I'm struggling because I'm like, I want to keep working on this past 5 o'clock, or, the kids have gone to bed. I'm going to hop back on my laptop and keep working on this thing I was doing before I wrapped up the workday. And I guess I've always had a little bit of an issue with that, just with like side projects like this and stuff. But it just speaks to the fact that it's like, that's not anything anybody ever really talks about when they're like, find your passion, do your, which is great when you're single and unattached and you have no other like considerations. It's awesome, right? Which is probably why no one ever talks about how then that becomes a struggle to find it then creates this struggle because now you're dealing with two things that you love and enjoy almost equally to some extent, like constantly pulling on you, back and forth.
Yeah.
But I love that. I love the idea of like never needing a vacation, right?
Yeah. Yeah. He has a funny thing where he talks about like people say I'm such a prolific writer because I put out so much stuff. He goes, I can't help it. He goes, I look at authors who publish one book every 3 years. I'm like, what do you do with all that other time? He goes, I can't help it. But
I've heard a lot of writers too talk about how I'm trying to think of the one in particular I'm thinking of. I can't remember if it was Ernest Hemingway or I don't know. One of them used to talk about how like you gotta wake up every day and write, regardless of what you write, whether it's shit or it's greatness. Mm-hmm. You gotta wake up and you gotta do it. And it was like that's the only way to actually pump out what's actually good. Like you got to make this like it's like a daily exercise habit. And you got to do it when you want.
All have very strict regimens.
Yeah. So true.
King talks about, he goes, he wakes up at the same time every single day, and he goes, and if he's writing, he closes his door. If he's editing, he opens his door. Which is very, he kind of talks about one of those things I'm open to other people, one of those I'm closed off to everyone. And he says, I do 2,000 words no matter what. He goes, I'm not always working on a story, but I have to do 2,000 words. And, but kind of what
I love that for so many reasons. Like, there's so many things I love about that. I love it because so many of us trick ourselves into this idea that we should feel the urge to do something before we actually do something.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, that is the greatest lie, because the truth is that you are never, if you want to wait on that magical moment of, I'm going to write a story today, or I'm going to write a book today, or I'm going to go pick up 500 pounds on the deadlift today. Like if you're waiting for that moment of inspiration to hit you, you're going to do it like twice in your life, Yeah. And so like, I love that idea of just, and that kind of like was that idea behind like writers who are professional and writers who are amateur, right? Yeah. If you're a professional writer, you write whether you want to, you write whether you need to, you just write because that's what you do and that's who you are. It's just like any other job, right? You got to just do it. And I feel that way.
He says on the days if he doesn't write, then he goes, then I read.
I love that.
He goes, that's my only alternative. He goes, and I hardly ever do it, but if I don't want to write that day, I read.
And I just like that. Like I like the habitual nature of it, forcing yourself to be very habitual. Yeah. And I love the fact of like creating very structured routines around things. Because I feel like I know some people probably don't thrive as maybe they don't feel like they thrive as much with routine, but I don't know. I feel like there's something about, to me personally, I feel like there's something about having that structure. Like there's just, you know what to expect in your day. You know what's happening. You know what's coming. You know what's next. It just removes a lot of thought and anxiety and uncertainty out of situations.
Well, it's like they talk about, by that book for anyone listening, it's Stephen King on writing. And it's a manual where he talks about like how to write books. But it's also kind of his autobiography, because he talks about some of his experiences growing up. It's a great book.
I may have actually bought that book, and it may be in my Kindle library, and I've never actually read it. I've got many books that are just sitting there languishing. Like, I need to read this. Let's see. On writing, a memoir of the craft. It's in my library. I've at some point. I read to page 31.
Okay.
So I'm stuck on page 30. But I'm gonna, now that you brought this up and you shared all these wonderful insights, I need to actually read it. Somebody must have recommended it to me at some point, and I bought it and then started and never finished it.
No, it's great. But like what you're talking about with structure, that's such a big part from the teaching side. And I think there's something there for dads and for parenthood for your children as well, is so much of teaching is what we talk about, setting up like classroom management, setting up structure. And so like I do this, and I know a lot of other teachers do it too, and it's a little less once you get to high school because those students already kind of know the ropes by then. But especially when I was in middle school, my first unit, I took a month to talk about here's the rules, here's the procedures. When we take a test, here's what we're going to do. When we do quizzes, here's what we're going to do. When we do projects, guys, here's the rubric I'm going to use to grade your projects, and here's what I'm looking for. If you need to use the restroom, we literally spent a whole day talking about here's the restroom procedure. What questions do you have? And that's more of something you have to do with middle schoolers. But
of course, yeah. I think I personally. I hate to ever sit in judgment like of others, but like that's something I have such a hard time empathizing with, like others who don't like I like why can you not have an order of steps, an order of operations for everything you do, and why can you not follow that order of operations? Like for me as an individual, that is like the easiest thing for me to do. If you write it, if you tell me the procedure, I will follow the procedure. Like no, and if I set myself a routine, I'm going to follow the routine. If I set myself a schedule, it's the weirdest thing, right? But I see others, and I see like especially as like coaching people with health and fitness, like I see how bad people struggle. Like even if they set the procedure, they just struggle to like actually follow through on whatever that thing is, which is obviously the key. Because like, you know, how many times have you been in a situation where people make jokes about how like a business or an organization or a corporation has like, here's the things you're supposed to do, and everyone's like, yeah, none of us do any of that shit, right? Like so like they're great. It's great if you've gotten it written down. It's great if you've like memorialized it. But if you don't actually do the shit, it's kind of, it doesn't serve a purpose.
Yeah, and it's with teaching. I think like what you're talking about. Why can't people follow the order of operations? I think it's like 10% of kids in every classroom are you. We're like, I'm not gonna have a problem with you having to use the restroom. And like that's just there's some kids where like you can give them this much instruction and they're off to the races. And then there's kids like me when I was in school who, and you see this a lot, especially in middle school, where you have kids that if they don't have a lot of boundaries at home, they will toe the waters on you in the classroom to see what they know exactly what's good and what's not.
Okay, they're like, let's see how long it takes to break this little bitch.
Yeah, let's let a little smell the fear. But they're saying, okay, how far can we push past the boundary though? But I think there's a lot there that lends itself to parenthood too, as far as creating structure. If I have a kid in the classroom who knows that on days we take notes, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have 5-minute quiz when we come in. We're going to go over the quiz really quick. You're going to do a rally robin, cooperative learning structure. Then boom, we're going into notes. You have to write down everything I haven't read. And then we end class with another rally robin structure, which is when I was doing middle school, that's what we did. We had notes. That was how it was every time. If they know that before we ever actually do notes, I don't have to worry about giving them extra instruction or wasting my time. And I think there's a lot to be said there. And then I worry people are going to hear this and be like, if you apply that to parenthood, they're like, what a Nazi. He's going to like set up structure. Like, this is how you clean your room, and this is how you eat your food, and this is how everything happens. But here's the thing is, yes.
No, and from my own, like just my own personal experience with our two children, if we leave our day relatively like, and what I mean by this is like we can do what we can we can structure, like we have the freedom to structure our day however we want to, right? Within certain like constraints of like bedtime, work hours, like we can pretty much do whatever we want, whenever we want. But that being said, when we don't kind of like have an overarching plan and the kids aren't aware of that overarching plan, the day oftentimes quickly devolves rather rapidly. And the children's behavior quickly devolves rather rapidly. Yet if we set a structure for the day, like we explain, like, okay, we're going to wake up, we're going to have breakfast. After breakfast, we're going to play some games. Okay, after games, we're going to take our nap. And then after nap time, we're going to go over to, your grandma and grandpa's house, and we're going to have dinner over there with them. And then we're going to come back and go to bedtime. When we like lay out that structure of the routine of the day, everything just goes so much smoother. It's like they don't react every time we say, okay, time for this. They don't like freak out, throw their hands in the air and start throwing and when we say, okay, you got 15 minutes before we have to get off of whatever you're doing and go take a nap. It's not like this big, huge ordeal. Like I guess what my point is to illustrate that, like, I think in some ways, as much as humans want to like react against anyone trying to structure them or schedule them, it's like in some ways we do kind of like desire that. We want to embrace it, and you often hear people that like when they make the change from being an employee to working for themselves, or whenever they have a transition where they have to be more self-managing, you often hear people, they struggle a lot because it's like there's no longer this imposed structure on them. Like if they don't have these set working hours and it's like they kind of like struggle to figure out what they should be doing and when they should be doing it, like which is interesting, because you would think if all these years you've been complaining about not having enough freedom, the minute you get all the freedom you want, you would just be like going buck wild crazy, right? Not complaining that now you don't have enough structure, right? So it's very interesting how like sometimes what we think in our head we need, or what we think is going to be helpful is not actually, like I think more of the issue a lot of times is not that we don't want structure, but that we want more autonomy in that structure, meaning we want to be able to feel like we have more of a say or more of a decision in what buy-in. Correct. Yeah. Like what does that, and like as a we talk about that a lot in terms of when we talk about how should we coach a client, and there's this technique called motivational interviewing. And they talk a lot about how like you're not trying to motivate a client. What you're trying to do is you're trying to help them cultivate that motivation from within, and then try to cultivate an environment where they can feel that motivation and find that motivation. So like a lot of the times you don't want to just tell a client like, okay, we're going to do deadlifts today. What you want to say is, we need to train legs today. Would you like to do some deadlifts? Would you like to do some squats? You want to try to bring a level of autonomy to their program so they feel like they have a say. 9 times out of 10, that adds to the sense of motivation that someone has towards actually doing something.
Yeah.
And like we do with our kids a lot too. We kind of apply that same kind of technique where we're like, okay, do you want to play Fortnite for the next 30 minutes before bedtime? Or would you rather go, do this before bedtime? But if we can only pick one, and if we do one, we can't do the other, that oftentimes like leads to a much easier transition to bedtime than just being like, oh, it's bedtime. We got to go.
Yeah. I think my dog's making their debut. No, I agree wholeheartedly. I think buy-in is such an important thing. I think what you said about they want that feeling of autonomy, I feel like that's vital. I do that in the classroom I'm really into doing projects. Speaking of bedtime. And we do a thing where like if I have them do presentations, I give them the option to do it however they want most of the time. where I say, if you want to do a PowerPoint or write a paper, or if you want to write a comic book or make a video. I had a girl last week make a music video where she literally wrote a song about the Middle Ages, and it was awesome.
That's
And
so
she
cool.
this high school girl, and she like recorded herself singing it into camera, which is very gutsy in high school.
Well, it's gutsy, but like it shows the fact that like when you kind of like to your point, it's like we've got to do X, but I don't really care how you go about getting to X. Like within this like kind of like loose framework, you have the freedom to make a choice. And when you provide that, then kids do things that they're excited about, that they're interested in, that they can kind of be creative with, and that, that's like that self kind of like that, like passion-led learning, kind of self-directed education where if you can find a way, it goes back to the passion thing, right? If you're interested in it, you like it,
exactly
you
what I was
enjoy
thinking
it,
in my head.
like you're gonna be willing to work at it. You're gonna want to succeed at it and be good at it, because it actually another coach that I used to talk to a lot used to say, like, people get confused with the word passion. They think passion means, you do something because you love it, right? And this coach was like speaking in terms of football, but he was like, really, passion it means to be willing to suffer for something. He's like, so it takes it to a whole nother level where it's not just you're doing this because you love it. Yes, you love it, but now you're going to a whole nother level where it's like, I'm willing to work for this. I'm willing to suffer for this. I'm willing to struggle for this thing. In that context, it was this idea of like, don't play football if you don't have a passion for it, meaning you aren't willing to suffer for it, because you're going to have to suffer for it. And that kind of applies to like work. It's like anything you undertake that you want to be successful at, it's not just going to happen. You're going to have to work for it. You're going to have to suffer for it. You're going to have to put in hours for it. And the only way you're really ever going to get to that place is if you do have like a legit passion for this topic, right? Or you find something that motivates you with that kind of passion. Like it's kind of like an indirect means to an end, where like, I'm doing this job because I have a passion to provide for my family, right? That's kind of like an indirect application of that idea, but it's that same, it's kind of the same, it's analogous to that.
And you have a regimented structure for that passion.
Oh, totally. And that's kind of like, that's marrying the best of both worlds, right? Like one of my favorite things, like I saw a t-shirt recently that said, it's like, hope is not a strategy or something like that. And that's kind of like, it's the best iteration of that. 'Cause it's like, just sitting around thinking like, well, I hope this will happen, or maybe I'll feel that way, or maybe I'll want to do that thing. That's great. Like you're coming from like a great place, but then you've also got to marry that with some realism of like, you're not just always going to want to do something. So you do have to create this like box for yourself to kind of direct you, down the path, like try to shape the path so that you move the way that your future self would want you to move. Because at times you're not always gonna be kind of like your ideal future self.
So how do you think we as parents and as dads do that for our kids? Because kind of what you talked about, and kind of my caveat when I was talking about like structuring everything is, I don't sit here and tell my kids, here's how you eat, and you have this long, and you put it in sync like this and this and that. No, it looks very simple. It's like we sit down, and by 7:00, they've had their baths and everything, and they usually get a couple minutes to play, and then by 8:00, everybody's winding down and going to bed. And it's just simple stuff, kind of what you said. On weekends, give them the roadmap for the day, so their brains can acclimate to that.
Yeah,
what do you think is left after that?
So I think first two things I'll preface my answer with saying is, one, I want to let everyone know that I did not come through on my guests for this podcast, which is why everything seems so off the cusp tonight, because I was supposed to have a guest. Unfortunately, I should have checked with that guest prior to committing to having a guest. So, but
I love it though. I love this conversation.
we'll have a guest soon. And second to that is like, I apologize that our conversation is so hodgepodge. And so now I get to my actual.
I apologize to no one. This is a great conversation.
No regrets.
One letter.
Okay, so when it comes to, I think at least the age where my kids are at now, I think it's really about that. It's just taking it to the highest level of abstraction. It's not even an intellectual thing. It's just, there's a routine. There just is. Like, there's a routine for bedtime. There's a routine before nap time. There's a routine around breakfast time. And just like everything in their life, they kind of like, because then they just pick up on this idea of like, okay, after this, we do that. After this, we do that. They pick up on this very basic logical if-then statement, or these very simple logic trees where it's like, when I wake up, I do this. After I wake up, we have breakfast. After we eat breakfast, we do this, and sticking to that, right? Like making sure they understand like kind of like talking to them about the reason we do this is to get you in the mindset to go to bed and to help you calm down and relax, to wind down to go to bed. The reason why we have a nap time every day is to provide you with rest, blah, blah, blah. So I think at the age they're at now, it's very concrete, and there's not a lot of intellectual to it. It's just helping them understand that life is full of routines, and these are good things for us, and they provide structure for our lives. And
say this is the time where they're learning how to be humans.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. You're just like, it's so basic, but it's so basic, and it's also very awe-inspiring, because you really come to realize like how much of a blank slate we are. Like everything is learned. It's just like it's just like the way we talk, the way we eat, the way we think, it's just very few things are come pre-programmed and default. We obviously. Go ahead.
Oh, well, just as you were talking, when you were talking about, kind of the structure you're setting up and everything, it makes me think of my favorite author is this guy named Orson Scott Card. And
it's Ender's Game, right?
Yes, sir. It is his game.
Yeah.
Great book. Okay, movie.
Yeah. But the hard part with the movie was, to me, the book for some reason, because it wasn't visual, it was really easy for me to suspend my belief about what was happening in the story in relation to the age of the children.
Yeah.
And then, but when you visually put it on a screen, it was really hard for me to suspend my beliefs, because now there was like this visual of these like super young children engaging in these like really kind of crazy things that just, you're kind of like, I don't know. That was like the hardest thing for me with the movie. And I didn't struggle with that at all in the book.
I like this little sidebar thing. He kind of, we'll return to the topic in just a second, but to answer that, I read a thing where he talked about, because he received criticism for that, and he said part of the reason it's easy in a book form is that so much of the story is in the main character's mind. It's his thoughts and feelings.
That's very interesting.
And he goes, and I don't ever remember a time where my brain switched and I thought, oh, I'm not a child anymore, or I'm not an adult anymore. He goes, I've always felt like my thoughts were concrete and fluid the way they are today.
That's fascinating.
He goes, and I think that makes a lot of sense.
It's so fascinating how like just changing perspective, just a slight tweak in the perspective of the narrative completely just like breaks the reality. Like it's just fascinating.
Good stuff. I love, he has a bunch of books that I really enjoy.
I've only read I read Ender's Game, and I think the second one. I think there's 3 total, right? There's 3 total Ender's.
There's a bunch.
Oh, really?
I lost track of all. My brother-in-law knows them all like offhand.
That's my brother-in-law is the one that got that. When like the year after we graduated high school, he was like, "Oh, you got to read these."
Yeah, I got him into it, but he likes the sequels a lot more than I do. So it's weird. So there's Ender's Game, and then there's a bunch of there's like 5 books after Ender's Game that are direct sequels to it. But then he wrote another book called Ender's Shadow, which is the same story of Ender's Game, but from kind of what you talked about perspectives, the point of view of another character in the story. And then that character has like 5 books of sequels.
Oh, wow.
So, and I don't love Ender's sequels, but I love the character Bean. I love his sequels.
Interesting.
So those are the books I'm really into.
I'm going to have to catch up on it. That's just my reading list is out of fucking control. It's like
that's not a bad thing to have out.
It's not, but it's just then I'm like, oh, then it's like there's only so many hours in the day, so I'm like, well, I'm gonna go do this, I'm gonna go do that. It's like, and then reading goes to like the bottom of the list, and it just keeps stacking up on me.
But back to like structures and everything, he has a TED talk where he's talking about creativity. He talks about, he says, and I'm paraphrasing here, it's been a while since I've seen this, but he basically says, I hate the idea that everybody says you have to think outside of the box to be creative. He goes, I do all of my coloring inside the lines, and I think that looks better than anything outside of the box.
I love that.
He says Shakespeare didn't free write poems. Shakespeare had very strict syllable counts, and he's the greatest writer of all time. Not because he thought outside of the box, but because within the box he created, he was able to achieve amazing things. And I think what you're talking about, what we're talking about tonight, I think that the young age both of our kids are in, and I have one who's in 1st grade, but at this point we're trying to set up the box kind of like what I was talking about, taking a month to go over procedures. Whereas right now we're trying to show them the basics of being a person. And I think as they get older, maybe still showing them, hey, we still have a routine. Here's how you thrive within that routine.
Totally.
And maybe
like that, and that's kind of where I was going to go, is like, I think the next step is as the kids get older, is helping them, because I think there's a lot of conditioning that takes place as we get older that there's 2 things, like, and I guess we can talk about this from 2 different perspectives. One perspective, like, is what you just mentioned, is creativity, where we're largely conditioned that creativity is this like abstract thing that just comes out of special people. Like it just bursts out of these people. And like, kind of like you were talking about with the Ender's Game author, and we were talking about with Stephen King. And what you find out with most creatives is it's not like this magical, outflowing, mystical power. It's really the result of a very disciplined and structured, methodical approach to what they do. And it's actually some recognition that 9 times out of 10, what I produce is gonna be bad, but I know I have to keep doing it to get to that 10th magical moment where I take that picture that goes on the cover of a magazine, or I paint that painting that gets sold for millions of dollars, or I write the novel that becomes a bestseller. I may have to write 10 novels that go nowhere to get to that 10th novel or that 11th novel that really like bursts me onto the scene,
Or I catch that pass in the big game, and while I practiced, I dropped it 50 times, but I kept going at it, and I finally got it in the big moment.
Yep, exactly.
I'm saying that because I feel like people rag on professional athletes, and I'm like, it's so much work.
It's the same thing, and it kind of ties back into last week's episode about that growth mindset idea. It's like it takes reps, right? And from that creative perspective, it's tough because you're conditioned the opposite. So a lot of the times you feel like you're not creative because you don't have this, like, you don't ever feel this mystical source of power that all these geniuses have, right? But what eventually is unlocked is like you find out that's not the case. That doesn't happen for anyone.
Yeah.
Most things are very intentional. And so as my kids get older, helping them understand, like if any of these things you want to do, that's great. I think it's awesome. But you do have to marry that with this realism that it's going to take methodical, structured effort applied very consistently for probably a significant period of time, or at least a period of time that is longer than your expectations. And then the second perspective is from the perspective of the conditioning that we receive around discipline. And the conditioning I feel like we get a lot is that discipline is this thing that some people have and some people don't. And if you don't have discipline, you're like a weak person and you don't have good morals or you don't have good virtues. And if you are a disciplined person, then you are somehow superior to others. And discipline is almost like creativity in the sense that it's this mystical, magical thing. And what I want my kids to get is that, if you struggle to force yourself to do something, like maybe you feel like you do lack discipline, quote unquote discipline, don't look at that as like a reflection on yourself as being a poor human being. And don't put everything on having that discipline to make something happen. I want them to understand, like, hey, if you build these routines, if you build these structures, if you create a path for yourself that you have no other option but to follow, that is a much better solution than relying on having the right discipline, the right amount of discipline at the right time. I'd much rather, going back to what I know the best, which is coaching clients, I would much rather you just don't buy the goddamn Oreos at Walmart and keep them in your pantry than buy them and then feel like you need to rely on having the right amount of discipline to only 2 Oreos right before bed. Like, just shape the path for yourself. If you know that you struggle with discipline around Oreos, don't put Oreos in your home, right? Like, and that's kind of like, I want my kids to understand that that's not a reflection on them as an individual. That's just being smart. It's being wise. It's using things we can't control to help ourselves move forward, move towards where we want to go. It's just like, if you want to save money, don't wait until the money hits your bank account so that you have to make the choice to move the money to your savings account. Automate that shit. Make the money flow from one account to the other, whether you want it to or not, because you already made that decision in advance. Like, you don't have to wait to have the right amount of discipline at the right time. Like this mystical source of like, I'm going to get shit done coming through right when you need it. Right.
Yeah.
And so as they get older, I want them to understand, like, you see all these routines that we've put in place for you. You see all the routines that we have as your mom and dad. These are good for us. They help us. They move us where we want to go. And then you can now take those same learnings and use them in your world to get where you want to go.
It's the idea of, I'm clearing out my castle. It's one of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten as far as moving forward on a goal. You have to clean out the castle. If you're worried about kind of what you said with the Oreos, then just don't have them in there. If you're worried about,
I can't tell you how many times I have conversations with people on that nutrition front. And I'm just like, why the hell were the baked goods in your home to begin with? Like, and it's so sad because people always say to me, oh, I'm a terrible person when it comes to nutrition. Oh, I'm so terrible that it's like, I just can't do it. There's no way and I'm just like, look, if anybody is to put something in front of themselves time and time again, nobody is perfect. You're not going to bat 10 out of 10. So just remove the possibility of the 10th time mistake, right? Like, just remove that from ever being a possibility. Like if it's something, and granted, yes, we need to learn moderation, but it's just, we all have those areas of our lives where we know we just shouldn't even tempt fate, right? Like, why even do that to ourselves? Because we know we may do it. We may say no once. We may say no twice, or we may say yes, to the right things. But there's always going to be that one moment where it comes down to having to make that decision and having to have that willpower, and it fails you. And it's just it's not that you're a bad person or you stink as a human being. It's just like shape your path a little better.
That's one of my favorite quotes is from an MMA fighter, Chael Sonnen, who, and if anyone knows MMA or knows who Chael Sonnen is, there's a lot that he says that you should not listen to, kids. But but he's a very thoughtful guy and he's a very eloquent guy most of the time. But one of my favorite quotes that he has, where he was talking in a coaching capacity, is he says, "You always hear the phrase failure is not an option." He goes, "That is the most ridiculous thing ever." He goes, "Failure is the most readily option available. It is the easiest path to walk down, and it's one that we choose more often than not." He goes, "Failure is a choice as well." And I didn't, when he first said that, I was listening, I was like, I don't know if I agree with that. Sometimes you try and you just fail, it happens. And I still kind of think that sometimes, but he says, it's about doing the little things in practice so we can get there. We're not going to tell him, go out there and don't fail. We're going to tell him, keep your hands up, keep your feet moving, make sure you have good timing. He goes,
exactly.
And those little things you can build victory upon.
And to
what you're talking about.
Well, yeah, it's 100%. And I think to your, because I think you're looking at that statement from a very practical, analytical standpoint, in the sense that there are definitely 100% reasons that you would fail. There, due to things that are just outside of your control.
Yeah.
But what we're trying to hopefully instill in our kids and reinforce in our kids is, you should, though, control what you can control. Why wouldn't you control what you can control, right? There may be other reasons why you fail, but let's eliminate the things that you can control that could cause you to fail, right? Like, let's take advantage of all that we have available to us.
I've had that conversation with my oldest so many times where she has come home and I ask her how her day went. She goes, "So-and-so said this to me today and was really mean to me." And I said, "Well, what did you do?" And she's a sweet girl. And she's like, "Well, I told the teacher or I just walked away or something like that." Not a very confrontational girl. And I just told her, I was like, sometimes people are going to do that. I said, "What do you want to do about it?" She goes, "I don't know. I just kind of want to keep being nice." And I'm just like, "Keep doing that then." I was like, "You can't help what they do." I was like, "You do what you can do." And we haven't had that conversation for a long time. I'm hoping it's because it's sunk in finally.
Well, and that's actually Kelsey and I talk about that. We find ourselves coming back to that I don't even know what you call it, that concept. We come back to it all the time because it's kind of the one truth in life. It's like it's you can only control what you do, and that's just it. Like, anytime your mind leads you to being concerned with things that are outside of that category, you're in a bad place. Like, you're in a place where you're inevitably going to find yourself, struggling. Like, you're just like, if you're worried about how somebody's going to react to what you do, okay, now you're in a bad place, because that's not on you. You can't control that. You can't do anything about that, right? And I find myself sometimes, I'm always like, well, if they do this, then what am I gonna? It's like, what they're gonna do is irrelevant. It's so much irrelevant, because it's like, all I can do is what I can do and what I want to do, and the way I live in accordance with my values and my purpose. The rest just kind of has to be what it's going to be, because I see that with my mom so much, because she has this constant concern and anxiety about what's going to happen or what this person does or what they say. And and I'm like, so much of that is driven by this desire to control things we can't control. And how much simpler life becomes, how much more peaceful life becomes when we start living kind of like within ourselves and not trying to kind of live too much beyond that, and just resigning ourselves to be at peace with that. Like I spoke kindly today. I treated people kindly today. I did the right things. I did my best, and that's all I can do. And I just have to accept that.
It's the classic quote from Marcus Aurelius, and I think I've said it on here before, is, I know that today people are going to be unreasonable and shout at me and say stupid things, and I can't control any of that, but I can control my actions. It's like I always
it's that I've heard it from Marcus Aurelius. I heard it. I think Mother Teresa is quoted for those those unconventional kind of commandments where it's basically like, people are going to spit at you, they're going to speak mean to you, but you're going to be kind anyways. Like you're going to do those things which are right, in spite of people not reacting the way you think they should do, or not doing what you think they should do. And then I also have heard it a lot in like AA and NA, like through the Serenity Prayer. It's just that constant
help me control the things that I can, and help me let go of the things I can't.
Exactly. And one of my like, I've never met him in person, and maybe someday I will, but he will probably go down as like handedly one of the most influential people, at least kind of like at least at the age I am right now, just one of the most influential people is Gary Vaynerchuk, because he talks about this so much, about how he's like, I don't need anything from anyone else. Like he's like, I know I'm good, right? And that's what matters. Like, I said what I needed to say. I did what I needed to do. I did what I could. I said what I could. And that's all. That's where I'm going to leave it. I'm not going to worry about anything else. I'm not going to concern myself with anybody else. I'm just going to be within here. I'm going to get real quiet. I'm going to stop listening to everything else everyone's saying and telling me to do. And I'm just going to try to live like in alignment with what I believe, right? And obviously, his bravado can put a lot of people off, but when you live like that, when you interact with other people like that, it suddenly it makes everything so much more honest and so much more open. And you're no longer playing this like chess game where you're sort of trying to manipulate people into doing and reacting the way you want them, right? It's very because I think so much of what we do, we hide so much of that.
More straightforward and honest.
Yeah, and so much of it we paint in a very rose-colored picture where we say like, well, I'm trying to like kind of like beat around the bush because I don't want to make them upset, or I don't want to get them, like we try to hide it behind like this sense of being considerate, and what we end up doing is we're really we're trying to manipulate people, and we're really trying to kind of push people to go where we think they should go, where we want them to go. And what we should do is we should just tell them what we think we should tell them, right? Yeah. Like it shouldn't be scary for us to just have a very open, honest, vulnerable conversation with somebody. If that person reacts poorly to what you said, I'm sorry, but that's not on me. When I'm honest with you and I tell you, well, no, I think you're just trying to hide behind the fear that you don't want to fail at what you're doing. I think none of your excuses are valid. I think you're just making excuses to protect yourself. If I tell that to somebody, if I say that to somebody and someone's like, well, that's not very mean, that's rude, if they have a poor reaction to that, I don't feel like that should really be liable to me. Like I said my truth. And I didn't say it like an asshole. I'm just sharing you with my real honest take on what you're telling me. You right? And it's funny because it's like the people in your life that you're closest to, that's where those struggles come up the most. Yeah. Right? Like that. people
That's where
here
you don't
not
want to hurt people.
correct, exactly. But unfortunately, behind that kind of like secret veiled goodness of like, well, I don't want to anger them, I don't want to upset them, I don't want to, you end up just having very inauthentic relationships, in my opinion. You just, and very manipulative. It's just very manipulative. It's like you're trying to like kind of coddle this person and try to push them to where you want them to go through modulating your words and your tone
I
and
think that's something that Gabby and I have done a really good job of. We were talking about this the other day, or we were talking about this today, actually. I was really proud of the fact that we were having, some issues with family members who were not doing great things, and none of them are listening to this podcast, so we're fine. But our oldest overheard a bad conversation on the phone the other night, and which is unfortunate, but we have a small house, and that's how it happens sometimes.
yeah.
And but we took the time to be like, "What are your questions? What'd you hear?" And she had a lot of questions. She's like, "What did this mean? Why was this said? Did this person really mean this?" And we just tried to be as upfront and as honest with her as we possibly could. And I think that stems from the fact that, both of us had parents growing up who kind of didn't want us to see kind of what you said. They wanted everything to be just everything's okay. The situation that's bad is actually not bad. Don't worry about it. It's okay. When you talked about those rose-colored glasses, it makes me think of um, one of the best books I've read that's helped me out as a father and as a husband, because I've always struggled with this idea of being the leader of the family and such. And I'm not saying dads have to be the leader of the family, but I think it's a co-leadership position, so you should learn how to be a leader. But is Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink,
I love that book.
where he talks about it's no BS. He goes, if you're in charge of a team and your team messes up, that's on you. I had yesterday we had a project,
which is, to your point there, that is the embodiment of, that is the very embodiment of, I'm only going to focus on what I can control.
yeah.
But
Jocko
I'm gonna assume ownership of everything.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna look at everything through the lens of what can I do? What should I have done?
Mhm. And that's been one of the best books for me as far as my family life, but it's also helped me quite a bit at work. I had an issue yesterday where my students were presenting a project, and I only had 2 students who presented the project that I asked for. A bunch of them gave me good presentations, but it was clear they hadn't looked at the directions very much, and it was clear they didn't understand the assignment. And I was really pissed.
Totally.
Especially I was being observed at the time, which happens for everyone. And so it made me look bad. I felt bad about it. I was really upset. But when they came back from lunch, and I had thought about it a little bit, I told them, I was like, guys, here's the deal. You guys turned in some good presentations, but they weren't exactly what I asked for. I said, that's my fault. That's on me. I must have not explained it well enough, and I probably didn't give you a good enough example. I said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a little bit of review over this topic. Tomorrow, I'm going to walk you step by step and show you exactly the example I want. And then I'm going to give you more work time on it. And I'm going to meet with each of you individually to point out, here's what I'm looking for differently. And I said, this isn't on you guys, this is on me. And I said, rather than give you bad grades for projects that are not what I asked for, we're going to take a little extra time, and we're going to make sure that this is reflected in your point total. And for the most part, I had like one kid who was like, this is bullshit. I don't want to do more work, which one kid in one class I'm okay with being like that.
Yeah, and I think that's because here's where I go in my mind. And this is where I see a lot of people fall into this. I see a lot of people default into this because to me it is the easier path. But what is the alternative to that situation? You being upset that somebody else didn't do something that you wanted them to do, right? So it's like, again, your desire to control others leads yourself to suffering in some way. And there's nothing you can do about that. You can't control other people. You can't, like, unless you like basically violate the Geneva Convention, you cannot take a human being and force them to do something, right?
Yeah.
And
My alternative is to give them bad grades or, lean into them and be like, why the hell aren't these projects what I asked for? Both of those are going to lose me trust and respect going forward, and it's going to derail my plans. It's the same in parenthood.
And they're somewhat non-productive, right? Because they all ultimately don't lead to any productive outcome, right? Like they don't drive an action that goes to a good place, right? It leaves you then, and it leaves your inner well-being dependent on somebody else's actions, right? And someone else's, how they do something, right? The way you responded, though, completely brings it all back within yourself. What can I do? How can I respond to this? How can I make this better, right? To me, that's like Jocko's point, right? It's like, that's the ownership. That's that extra. There's another guy, his name's Tom Bilyeu, and he talks about this too, this concept. And he puts it in such extreme terms that most people will laugh at this, but it illustrates this concept really well. He talks about, like, if a meteor was to come out of space and strike his house and kill his wife, he will hold himself responsible for that. Because, and this is the way he thinks about this, because he made the decision not to engage or support research that is currently ongoing, that is working on developing ways to detect incoming near-Earth objects, and then put into place systems to mitigate the impact of those objects on Earth. That's real work that scientists and governments are doing because that is a real existential threat to the human race. But he made the decision, right? Whether you want to say that decision was rational or logical, because it is kind of rational. That's a very like 1 in a million type of thing, right? But instead of being pissed and angry at the universe and, make himself suffer for the actions of other people or the actions of the cosmos, to kill his wife in this way, he will take ownership of that and say, well, that's on me. I should have done more to mitigate that. I should have done more to support people and processes and systems that could have prevented that, right? That's a very extreme, out there example, but
I love that.
It shows you, like, if you take it to that level of extreme, then when you run into a rude person on the street or at your job or at your work, that's not going to disrupt you, because you're going to say, okay, this person's being rude. What can I do? How do I respond? I'm not going to justify the way I treat them based on how they're acting. I'm just going to stay inside myself and think, okay, how do I want to respond here? How do I address this person? What can I do to help make this person feel better or be more positive? Or how can I positively engage with this person? And I really want my kids, I really want to find a way. I really want to live this out, because I really want my kids to own it, because I don't want them to suffer needlessly. Like, I don't want them to have so much of their mental well-being, their physical well-being. I don't want them thinking that it's dependent on people. I don't want them to thinking it's dependent on somebody treating them a certain way, talking to them a certain way. Like, I want them to understand that their peace and their happiness and that their state of being is 100% within their control at all times. Like, any time you feel that somebody else is making you feel a certain way or act a certain way, you are lying to yourself. You are just 100% lying to yourself, because all those things, no one has any control over except you. You are the one making a decision to let this person's actions or words or beliefs impact you. And if you act in a way that's not in accordance with the way you want to live your life, that again is your decision to allow these external events to have control over yourself. And I don't understand why anybody would want to give up any control. Like, why would you give up any control of all the things that, like, of all the things you can't control, why would you want to give up control of anything that you can?
Yeah. And what you're talking about, passing that on to kids, that idea that this is on me. And I think it comes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, is the people who focus on that, they're regimented, they're structured, and a lot of that stuff is made by them. It's the suffering they want for their passion because they realize there has to be some control over it. They have to control themselves because that's really all they can do.
That's the only.
I think that's what it goes back to. I think building that structure to where they're familiar with it, they understand, okay, this is where I work. These are the boundaries that I can work in. And these boundaries are not what's limiting me. They're what's keeping me.
Mm-hmm.
They're
putting me in the best position to be successful and to behave, to think, to act the way I want to, because we a lot of times, we sit here and we have these deep conversations. We think about this stuff. What's important to me? What matters to me, right? But then we all run into these situations where like, why didn't I live that out in this situation, right? Well, then, because you somewhat left it up to hope, right? Like, you should try to learn about yourself and understand yourself so that you know, okay, I need to do, like, to your point, I need to have an XYZ routine to put me in the right position to make the decisions, make the actions, speak the words that I want to actually, that I know I want to live out. And when I leave it up to chance and I leave it up to my in the moment decision making, 5 out of 10 times I mess it up. I don't follow through.
Thomas Jefferson has a great quote where he talks about, I can't remember if he says it's the more I study or the more I think it's the more I work, or the harder I work, I find the luckier I get.
So yeah, I 100% agree with that. Right, I totally agree with that.
It's got to come from yourself, and if you want to, I really think if you want to build that with kids, whether it's in a classroom or whether it's with clients in a gym or whether it's your children at home, if you set up your own boundaries, you model that, you live that, and they live within that, and they achieve success with you, then I think that's the best possible way to set them up for that.
Yeah, you gotta model it, and that's why when we see people who do model it, it's, at least in my theory, that's why when we see people like Jocko Willink, or we see people like Gary Vaynerchuk, who are like 100% themselves, and they're living within themselves, and they don't need anything from any other people. I think it's why we're drawn to people that like that. We see it and we're drawn to it because we almost instinctually know there's something special and magical about that we haven't seen modeled to us from any other people in our lives, right? It's like, you're like, oh, that guy's figured it out. That guy knows something that I don't know, right? Or
you see the other side where like you see guys like that, or like Dave Goggins, and they're like, that guy's crazy. Like, well, he thinks the same thing, but about you.
Yeah, it's funny too. Like there's a level to that which people want to also like to your point, people also don't like it because now they no longer bear any kind of control over you, right? Like now there's no way they can't manipulate you or move you or like now that you've kind of divided yourself from the external. It's like, well, this person doesn't react when I say things that normally, it's like and then when you're open and direct with them and you put the responsibility for their emotions and their actions on them. Like you no longer take responsibility for the way they behave and the way they act. They are so reactive to that. It's like, yeah, but you made me, but you did. It's like they become so accusatory, and they like, oh, you're not considerate, you're not a good person, you're not respectful, you're not this, you're not that. And it's like, that's somebody they're lashing out, right? They're because they're so used to communicating with other people who accept responsibility for other people's actions and think they can control other people's actions, right? And they're so used to that dynamic that when they encounter somebody where this person doesn't need anything from them and isn't going to be responsible for anything from them, they're not really sure like how to parse that interaction.
And I think that's something, once you flip that switch also, where you realize I'm responsible for me and no one else, or as far as reactions go. Obviously, the whole point of this podcast is we are responsible for
Oh, no, totally.
But when you're responsible for your reactions.
Yeah. Trying to model we're talking about trying to model these things that we want.
Yeah.
Like I don't want my son to say, but you made me mad, right? I don't ever want, I want to teach him like, look, buddy, it's okay to be upset. That's fine. But that is 100% your emotion, right? No one made you mad. You made the decision to get upset because mom or dad didn't do exactly what you wanted mom or dad to do, or how mom and dad didn't allow you to do exactly what you wanted to do. So, but you need to own that emotion.
What decision are you going to make going forward?
Correct.
Because of this decision?
Exactly. And just and that's what we try to reinforce with him is like, especially Cal, because he's kind of more at that age where he can really clearly articulate those things. Is like, that's fine. Like your emotion, a lot of times your emotions are 100% understandable. They're justifiable, but they're on you. They're not on us. They're not on your brother. They're not on anyone else. They're for you to accept, and they're for you to deal with and you to process. And we're here to help you with that. We're here to like create safe space for you to work through that and help teach you ways to deal with them. But you're not going to go around throwing stones that the way you're acting and the way you're feeling is because of somebody else, right? Because that just leads you down that negative, bad path where you think for the rest of your life, your happiness, your well-being, your peace, your emotional state is always dependent on how somebody else is being, right? Or what somebody else is saying, right? Donald Trump isn't going to make or break my day, right? Like what he tweaks isn't going to get my panties all up in a bunch. Like whether or not I agree or disagree with what he says, there's no way in hell I'm giving up control of my emotional state to him, right? It's just like, and that's what I'm hoping to try to instill with our kids is like, you need to grab a hold of that power because it is so empowering, and you need to never give it up, right? You need to, and like that's how what motivates me on a daily basis is I think of this like a fight. The world wants to try to take my peace and my power from me, and I'm not going to let them. No one is going to wrestle it out of my hands. So if I'm upset, it's on me, right? Yeah. And I'm the one that's going to fix it. I'm going to do something about it. And I sometimes empathize with anybody who, why wouldn't you want to get on board that train, right? Like that. I don't know why
you're saying. Why wouldn't you want to follow that process? That's what you're saying at the beginning.
I do, and I personally acknowledge like there are times where I just can't. I understand what people are saying when they say stuff like that. I understand what they're getting at where, oh, this person upset me, or this person made me have to be a jerk, or I like intellectually, I get what you're saying. I can bridge the gap. But there's a deep place deep down in me that's like, I just don't understand why you want to live in that reality. Yeah. Like you're just powerless apparently then. You're just at effect to the world, I guess. Whatever the world does to you, it's going to do.
And
It's
you
going to
know why
run.
you're powerless in those situations? Because you have absolutely no say in what you're doing, and there's no regimen or structure.
Yeah, you're just getting
Love
run
it.
over.
It comes back around again.
Well, I'll just wake up today and just see what washes over me. Like,
Yeah.
no,
and
I'm
and,
just,
and kids pick up that kids see it. You have to model that. It has to come from within ourselves, but you also have to realize that it also comes from the parents. Where God and Adam on the roof of the Sistine Chapel get giving the power out.
dude, it's so, like, I could just, we've gone so long and I could go on and on about
That's
this.
all
And
right.
like, if anybody meets me in person, like, I am totally the guy who is going to, like, not say like 10 fucking words in a group conversation. But I have like, it's funny because, like, I know, like, that way I get, like, nobody is gonna wrestle my power from me. Like, that's the level of like, I don't visually, like, my wife will tell me like, I don't externalize that level of intensity. Like, most of the time, like, I seem pretty, like, contained and subdued. But in my head, that's the way I'm feeling. That's what I'm thinking, and that and I have that level of conviction and belief about these things. So I'm always, so, like, when I'm with other people, I'm always very, like, hesitant to share those things, because I know, we strike people pretty intense, and people will sometimes be like, yeah, but what about this? And what about that? And, like, just nobody's going to change my mind on it, because I've already made up my mind. I've done the thought process. I've done the thought exercise 100,000 times. And this is the conclusion I've come to. But it's so fun, like, on, like, these types of things, like, getting to talk about this stuff, because you don't have to deal with, like, everybody reacting to what you're saying the moment you're saying it, right?
Yeah. And you get this long form way of being able to communicate it too.
Yeah,
This is
to like dig into the subtleties, right? Like especially, like,
not to get not too political, but this is what debate should be.
oh, totally,
Is people
totally.
getting to calmly explain it in long form. Like, there's no way that you and I could talk about the complexities of being a dad in 2-minute segments with 10-minute responses.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. It's just not.
we have several hours already of
There's
content, and we have
there's too many subtleties to this stuff. Like, you can't do that. I feel like
life.
I feel like one of the things that our society currently struggles with, like, one of my scientist heroes is Albert Einstein. I talked about that before, and he's got this famous quote where he says, like, the hallmark of genius is being able to hold two contradictory ideas in your head at the same time. And I feel like that is, in today's world, where we struggle. Everything has to be so black and white, this or that, red or blue, male or female. Everything has to be so binary that we can't actually have these very, like, important intellectual conversations, because there's so much gray, and you have to be able to pull from the both ends of the spectrum almost simultaneously. Like, you have to be able to understand that you can be over here on this issue, but on this issue be over here, and that's okay. Like, you can be somewhat of a contradiction. Not everything has to be perfectly in alignment down one way, right? Like, you can acknowledge both truths, right? Like, you can acknowledge that the meteor coming out of the sky and hitting your wife is completely, like, it's irrational to be concerned about that, right? But at the same time, you can also believe that if that happens, it's your fault, right? So it's like, you can pull on both things at the same time.
It's one of the reasons I love teaching history. There's so many things that are objective in history, because it's social science. There's a scientific method to studying history, but at the same time, it can be so subjective, to where, like, here's what happened, but here's my opinion on it, or here's what happened, but here's how it looks from this group of people.
Yeah, and that's probably even from the humanities perspective, you know, in terms of like having discourse with others, that's probably the bigger skill, right? Is like, here's like, for example, let's talk about like a classic example, World War II. Okay, here's how everybody saw Nazi Germany, right? Through like the external like world powers, that from the, like the Allies' perspective, right? Yeah, total evil, right? Just complete evilness, right? Like just made no sense. Okay, but then if you flip it and you put your glasses on somebody who grew up in Germany through the Weimar Republic, through World War One, through the what was it, the Treaty of Versailles, and lived through all that, you can kind of see like how they got to where they got, and like how their thinking led them, that those decisions and conclusions made sense. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them. It just means you can kind of understand that side of it, right? And you can have a discourse about it.
I mean, if you think about it, from the one thing that always blows me away, and the drivers and the kids can't believe it, is talking about like how desperate people can be. The German mark at the time, their dollar was worthless because the country was wrapped with inflation. I always show kids this picture of these kids that are stacking money, and the stacks are higher than them, and then they're setting it on fire because they don't have firewood, because the marks are so worthless that they might as well burn them so they can stay warm. Could you imagine if that happened in America today?
Oh,
What kind of mindset would happen in a person? Of course they were looking. It doesn't mean, like you said, it doesn't mean they're right, but of
it
course
just
they were
means you
looking to
can.
that person who, when he spoke, like him or not, when he spoke, was speaking directly to your hopes and your emotions and your fears.
Correct.
Of course.
And that's because you can be a human being and empathize with others, right? And that's it's like that, and that is like, I'll just go straight up political. That is the Democratic Republican polarization issue in the current United States, where we have turned it into tribal warfare,
Yeah.
instead of trying to understand how people could come to vote for Donald Trump, or how people could come to see Joe Biden as a potential unifying president. Like, that's when we completely write off others as being ununderstandable. That's how we end up in these really polarized times. Like, that's how we can dehumanize people to a level at which we feel we can do whatever we want to them, and it doesn't matter.
I was talking to another history teacher at work the other day, and I was like, man, this whole thing is showing exactly why history is so important, why social studies classes are so important, and you're starting to see why things are going the way they are, because we've de-emphasized social studies so much in school. And I made the joke to Gabby, and she was like, what do you think of all the way people are reacting on both sides right now? I said, there's a lot of people here who would have failed my history class. Because I have Socratic seminars all the time where the kids will debate things. I had seventh graders in rural Kansas debating abortion.
That's awesome.
Those kids did not call each other a single word, or did not say one time that a person who gets an abortion is evil. They went straight up, because we had so many Socratic seminars. I always told them, if you call someone an idiot or you call someone stupid, not only are you wrong, but you have automatically lost.
Totally.
It doesn't matter what you say after that, you have lost. And it's one of my proudest teaching moments, because they were like, can we talk about this, Mr.? Because they were having a different one. They're like, can we talk about abortion? I was like, if you guys want to, let's just, the rules. And I didn't have to say anything the rest of the time. These seventh graders were talking about, choice and responsibility and society. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. I was so proud of them.
Say what you want. I know, obviously we can be as cynical as we want to be and say what you want about previous times in America when it comes to politics. And we can criticize the people who were allowed into those conversations, but I feel there was a time in which we could have civil discourse. Like I could love my neighbor and disagree with him on matters of policy and still want to help him, move, still want to help him, clean up his yard, still want to go over and have, a cookout with him. I feel like there was a time in America where that was commonplace. And I feel like we've come to a point in which that's not acceptable. If people don't align with the way I see things, they don't understand what I believe, then I just have to write them off. They can't be a part of my life. They can't be involved with it. I can't respect them. I can't, it's just, we've come to this just terribly polarized place. It's become so tribal. And that's the best way I can put it, because there's no real logic to it. It's just completely my team versus your team. And it's, I don't know. It's just, I get so frustrated.
I think a lot of it is we've lost the ability to realize that other people have different experiences from us.
Yeah. That is so, I mean, that is just so true. And a lot of the times it takes us having somebody really close to us that we feel that we can relate to, that we can empathize to, that we do love, that we do care about. Suddenly an issue touches them, and through their experience, now it awakens us, it enlightens us, right? Like I see that a lot, in particular with the issue of like the LGBTQ communities. I see a lot of people who, for a majority of their life, they have very strong beliefs about those issues. And then they have a personal acquaintance or a personal friend or a loved one who experiences those issues firsthand, right? And then all of a sudden, these people with these deep convictions, all of a sudden, very quickly, can suddenly empathize and understand with this whole community and group of people. Whether or not that converts their beliefs, like it changes their beliefs about policy and issues, it allows them to see the other side as human beings. It allows them to oh, now I get it. Now I see why they advocate for the positions they do. Now I see why. Okay, I won't use these derogatory terms. I won't dehumanize them with very stark, polarized language. I'll speak to them as if I was speaking to anybody else in my life that I care about. And I don't know what's going to heal us. I don't know what's going to change that. But I just don't see anything really good coming from the kind of discourse, the kind of just tribalism that's happening on very important substantive matters. We are just playing so superficial.
I think the issue is that in our politics today, by the way, I love this because I've thought about starting a politics podcast. So I like how we've diverged a little bit, but I love talking about this stuff. Is we have two tribes, like you said, you have the right and you have the left, and there's so many more people who hate both of those sides and are not associated with either. In this last election, more people voted than have ever voted before. We had almost half the population vote. I think it was close to 150 million people, and we still haven't counted all the votes yet. But that still means the other half of the country, just as big of a portion, if not bigger, is like, no, I don't want to be a part of that.
I think people feel, to your point.
Say what?
I was going to say, to your point about there being two teams, I think neither of those teams represent the diversity of the differing opinions, the contradictory opinions that Americans hold. And therefore, because both parties are so polarized and will not accept anybody into their team where they don't 100% lock in step with the party views, they're not welcomed. Like they're just run out of Dodge, right? Like try being a Democrat who's pro-life, right?
Yeah.
Try being a Republican who wants a single payer healthcare system. Like you're like, the team is just going to decide to write you off. You're going to be vilified, even if you align on like 50% or 60% of the things. If you differ in any one, like any minutia thing on the quote unquote party line, you're just not welcome, right? Like we saw that, a lot too in the last few years with how, people, who have come to not really always, people who have been even of the slightest critical of the president have been subject to very severe retribution, right? Like, and that's kind of like it doesn't speak well, right? It doesn't speak well to discourse when you can't have a disagreement with people who, in majority of things, you would fit in, and them not be like, yeah, that, we disagree, but we still love having you on all the other things, right?
I have a theory on this, but it's nothing I could ever write like an educational paper over, because it doesn't really it deals with feelings. I think the issue is we no longer have political ideas. We have political beliefs. One of my favorite movies is a movie called Dogma. It was made in 1999. And I think me and 4 people have seen that movie. And it's a very obscure movie. And it's very much about like religion and stuff like that. It's a comedy. It's very funny. Highly recommend it. Dogma, written and directed by Kevin Smith. And there's a phrase in there where this guy is talking, and this guy, the character, it's Chris Rock, and he's like this. He's a former apostle of Jesus, and it's as great as you can think of Chris Rock being an apostle. But he says, I don't think political beliefs are a good thing. He goes, I don't think religious beliefs are a good thing. He goes, I think it's better to have a good idea about something. He goes, you can change an idea. You can admit you are wrong on an idea. He goes, it's a lot trickier to change a belief. He goes, people die for beliefs. I think it's the same thing with politics. We no longer have this discussion where you say, I think we should do this for healthcare. I think we should do this for climate change. I don't believe that type of healthcare can work. I don't believe climate change is real, or I don't believe.
It's to your point. It's religious dogma is what it is. It's 100% the definition of religious dogma, where people have stopped critically thinking about the idea itself and have just been like, they've just taken somebody else's conclusions, right? The thinking of somebody else that led them to a particular conclusion, and they've just decided, I'm going to take that and run with it.
Yeah, I'll give you a personal example. I was debating with a friend of mine about all the polls coming up to the election, and I was like, because the polls showed that it was going to be a landslide. And if you go by popular vote, it kind of was, but in the current system, it was pretty close. And it was much closer than the polls would have it led to believe. And part of me, when I saw that, I was like, now I have to admit that I was wrong about the polls. Because even though it did have the right outcome, it was so much closer than what I thought it would be. But that's the whole thing of, I was like, you know what? That was what I thought, and I was wrong, and that's okay.
And it's interesting, like you bring that up. It's like the religious dogma of one party would say we should take those polls as being factual, right?
Yeah.
But if we're being if we're being Socratic, if we're being critical thinkers, we should really think about those polls deeper. We should think about, okay, who responds to those polls? How are those polls conducted? Who are the type of people who would be likely to respond to those polls, right?
For the next 4 years, those are going to be the deep questions asked about.
Yeah, polls. Exactly. But like
they've gotten it wrong 3 elections in a row.
True. You're 100% right. But like in terms of our conversation about polling, we shouldn't get caught, we shouldn't get caught up in that dogma of other people's thinking where they say, oh, these polls are correct, they're accurate, they're, and that isn't to say that I'm not advocating for people to become critical thinkers of like every known fact in this, I'm not saying you need to critically think about gravity. I mean, gravity is what gravity is. What I'm saying is for those things that have more substance, more abstraction, just defaulting to a party line or a party statement or a party dogma on an issue, that's what leads us to like, okay, I must win this for my party. Therefore I cannot give up any ground on an issue, right? We're no longer discussing.
Idea. Sorry.
No, you're good. I mean, we're just at that point, we're no longer discussing policy. We're no longer talking about politics. It's not politics.
We're discussing anymore. Pro football at that point.
Yeah, it's fandom. It's what it is.
Yeah, it's like a conversation with a buddy of mine where he was talking about this party has to do this to have the Senate, and I hope this party has the Senate. Blah 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 blah. And I hope these senators win. I'm like, do you know anything about these senators? He's like, well, what senators do you want to win? I was like, I don't know. I don't know enough about these senators. I was like, this one kind of seems like a sketchy person. This one seems like an okay person. He goes, well, those people are in the same party. I was like, yeah. I was like, there's good and shitty people in both parties.
Yeah. And that actually, like, and I was just getting ready to say this, and I said this to Kelsey on the way back from, we were in Kansas City kind of over this after all this election stuff kind of was playing out. And I said this to her on the way back. And, I told her, I said, I know this sounds really elitist. Like I totally admit what I'm about to say sounds totally elitist, but the parties have basically decided that we're just going to play to the lowest common denominator. Americans can understand fandom. They can understand bad versus good. They can understand blue versus red. We're not going to worry about trying to get Americans to understand the finer details of policies. We're just going to get them to understand that if you're a Republican, you should think policies that place restrictions on organizations in the name of climate change is bad. You don't need to know anything other than that. You just need to know it's bad. And you need to advocate for it being bad because you are part of the Republican team. And if you are part of the Democrat team, then you're going to advocate the opposite, right? So to me, that's what we're playing to that lowest common denominator of human intellect. And then you layer on top of that I don't think a lot of Americans are actually taking the responsibility to actually do any real type of education on any of these issues. So they don't even have a depth of understanding or a knowledge reservoir on any of these subjects to have a substantial conversation about them. Most people don't even understand the progressive tax system in the United States. So they can't even have a conversation about what is the best tax system, right? Like most people don't understand when someone says, oh, well, I'm taxed at 50%, right? It's like, no, up to a certain dollar amount and over your tax at, right? Like most people can't even articulate that, right? So therefore we can't have a real conversation about why progressive tax systems are bad or good, how they function, how they're intended to function. We can't talk about what the alternatives are. So it's unfortunate, but the party kind of is there's people that study this stuff for those parties, and they kind of I feel like they've clued in on that, and they've decided, look, Americans have too much going on in their lives to worry about the details. So let's just make it simple for them. If you're Republican, these things are good, these things are bad, right? And you just need to battle with the other team on them. It's binary.
And it boils down to what you said. It's manufactured, and it's manufactured because there's a profit.
Totally. Someone benefits from all this.
They are making a product to sell.
And I know to some you can spin that and make it sound very cynical or conspiratorial, but I don't mean it in that sense. I just mean it, I totally just mean it from the standpoint of if it really was about policy, we would need a 3-hour conversation to really dig into the policies of national security, the policies of American, our diplomatic policies when it comes to cyber warfare. We would need 3-hour conversations. We would need a presidential podcast where each week there's a 3-hour conversations where we dig into the substantial details of each one of these areas to really understand why a president believes this type of system is better than that type of system, because it's too complex to unravel, to your point, in 60 minutes with 2-minute answers. It's just, I don't know how else to kind of put it more plainly than that, but
there's a great podcast where, and I know people have mixed feelings on him, and I mean, you think what you want about him, but it was Bernie Sanders is on the Joe Rogan podcast.
That was a great interview.
It is, and he asked him about the debate system, and Bernie Sanders said, I think was fairly accurate. He goes, "We shouldn't even call them debates, Joe Rogan." He goes, "They're not debates; they're press conferences." He goes, "We've organized press bites for them." He goes, "That's what it is. It's not a debate."
It's so true.
He goes, "We can't argue the complexities of healthcare in America."
And all they do during it is pander to the party lines, right? They're just. It's unfortunate. I guess the reason why maybe this is applicable for two dads to talk about on a random Wednesday night is the only way we re-enter a more civilized, I guess, political life is through us trying to advocate for that type of behavior when it comes to talking about politics and discussing politics. And then again, modeling that for our children. This is what it looks like to actually discuss these things, is to have a productive and meaningful conversation. You don't need to devolve into hatred and bigotry and calling each other names. You can have a friend that you care a lot about, and one of you can be a staunch believer in, capitalist free system economies, and the other one can be a staunch advocate for, more state-run, federally controlled businesses like that. You can have those discourses and discuss the benefits and still have mutual respect and mutual understanding in all other areas of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. This became a very different podcast very quickly, but I liked it.
It did. It's basically like 2 in 1. People are going to, they get a bonus episode here.
We can have that. Like, this is the bonus political video.
That's right. It's like you get to minute 50, it's going to turn to politics, but have
like
fun
what they
with
used
it.
to do with CDs. If you wait after the last track, there's a hidden song.
All right, man. Well, I'll let you get back to what's left of your Wednesday night.
Absolutely. I'm probably just going to go to bed.
Yeah, me too. All right, man. We'll talk again soon. See you, dude.
See ya.